Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 9th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax collection station and said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. And as he sat at dinner in the house, many tax collectors and sinners came and were sitting with Jesus and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when he heard this, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." While he was saying these things to them, suddenly a leader came in and knelt before him, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hands on her, and she will live." And Jesus got up and followed him with his disciples. Then suddenly a woman who had been suffering from a flow of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak, for she was saying to herself, "If only I touch his cloak, I will be made well." Jesus turned, and seeing her, he said, "Take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well." And the woman was made well from that moment. When Jesus came to the leader's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, he said, "Go away, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl got up. And the report of this spread through all of that district. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. You may be seated. The last word of that reading that Guillermo read from Paul was justification. That's a big, ominous, theological sounding word, but it just means being right with God, justified. How are we made right with God? There's something about today's reading that you ought to know. It has to do with Matthew the tax collector. Now, when we hear tax collector, I don't know about you, but I think about I think about the IRS. I think about an auditor, right? And just friendly reminder: if you pay quarterly taxes, they're due in a couple of weeks. But this tax collector who Jesus meets is not just an IRS agent. That's not really who we're talking about. We're actually, it goes a little bit further than that, because you have to remember that in the land that Jesus is in that time, it's occupied by Rome. So this Matthew, the tax collector, is an agent of Rome. But Rome did this thing where they used local people to do their bidding. It was a very sort of sophisticated device of control. And so Matthew is a local kid, a kid from the community who is an agent of occupying Rome. In other words, he's a collaborator. He's a traitor. That's more of the sting. That's more of the scandal here. It's not just an IRS agent. It's more like if Jesus was inviting a member of the Vichy government, the Vichy regime in France during Nazi occupation, to the table. That's the level of scandal that we have here. This person who the rest of the community, when they look at this person, they say, "We would all be better off if this guy were gone. We would be healthier, we would be happier, we'd have more money in our pockets," right? If this Matthew were gone. And Jesus welcomes Matthew to the table. That's a scandal. Jesus says of Matthew, and I think we can insert this in. I desire mercy for Matthew, not his sacrifice. There's something about that logic of pointing to a person or pointing to a group of people that has kind of a sacrificial sort of element to it. I mean, when we look at a group of people and we say something to the effect of, we would be better off if it weren't for them, right? We would be happier, we would be healthier, we would be stronger, we would be smarter, we would be richer if they were not here with us. There's a kind of a sacrificial element to that, right? It's this element that says, get rid of them and we are going to be okay, right? And that's a logic that I think human beings are really good at. So not only is this tax collector a traitor, a collaborator in the worst of cases, but he's also the scapegoat that his community looks to and says, if it were not for you, we'd all be better off. This week, one of my colleagues asked a question in our Bible study. They said, well, who's Matthew today? And, is this an IRS agent? So we had this conversation. And we dialed into this logic of sort of scapegoating. And for me, I think any community that we point to and say, you are the problem, if you were gone, we'd be better off. I think any community that receives that is Matthew in a way. And the scandal still works of Jesus, welcome to that person. And for me, maybe this isn't you, maybe this is not your value system, but for me, one of those groups that I hear this in our national discourse about our own safety, health, well-being, rich quality, one of the groups that I hear that about is immigrants in the United States. How often do we hear that? A politician, an opportunist politician, or a local leader pointing to folks who are in the bubble of immigrant and saying, if you were gone, we would be better off. And that's the thing about that term immigrant is it's huge, right? It's almost as big as this term sinners, right? Jesus is eating with sinners and tax collectors. Within that bubble of the word immigrant is folks who are here legally, looking to acquire a green card through legal means, people who are having work visas, people who are asylum seekers or refugees, people who are here illegally by means that are not those channels that we would hope. That's all in there, and yet they get sort of wrapped into this rhetoric of, if you were gone, we would be safer, we would be better, we would be healthier and happier. Today, Jesus upsets this logic and says, I desire mercy for Matthew, not his sacrifice. Jesus is inviting us into a different way. But just when we think, like, okay, so I probably tilted my hand here and given you my political value system by naming immigrants as that body of scapegoated people. But just when we think that we understand this story, right? Jesus moves on and he's approached by a leader of the synagogue. Now, here's what's kind of funny about that, right? The very people who are criticizing Matthew as a traitor and collaborator are the Pharisees. Now, who's palling around with the Pharisees every day? This local synagogue leader. And does Jesus say, gotcha, ha ha, now it's time for revenge, now I can get back at you? No. This local synagogue leader says, my daughter is dying and I need you. And Jesus says, yes. just when we think we've understood Jesus, he turns the tables on us. And to use the same sort of image of American politics in this sort of story, this gospel story, I would say maybe this is an immigration customs enforcement officer coming to Jesus saying, "My daughter is sick. Will you help her?" And Jesus gets up from the table surrounded by asylum seekers and refugees and says, "Absolutely." And he goes. And on the way, another person comes from behind. That means she's coming through all those means, those channels that are inappropriate. A person comes up from behind and reaches for Jesus. And I'd like to imagine, just for my own sake, this is a white Christian nationalist, a person who I don't really want to receive Jesus' love, frankly. And she touches Jesus, and power flows and healing flows, and she is made well. That's the scandal of this story. That's the thrust of this story. That our logic of scapegoating, of pointing to any body of people and saying, if only we sacrificed this group of people, the rest of us would be a lot better off. Jesus completely turns that idea on its head and says, no, that's not God's logic. Mercy, sometimes we think of is healing or as leniency, but in this story, mercy is not leniency. Mercy is healing. Mercy for the woman with the flow of blood is healing. Mercy for the little girl in the bed who is raised up is healing. Mercy for Matthew, the tax collector, is healing. Jesus doesn't show him leniency. He says, follow me. There will be healing in this following. How are we made right with God? How are we made right with one another? It's not through sacrificing those people, those groups. It's through mercy. That's how we're healed. But I'm really, really conscious, and I think Jesus is also conscious, that we cannot show mercy to one another unless we are dead certain of God's mercy for us. And Jesus, as if to finally just upset the scale here, upset and scandalize us, says, look, all of this sacrificing y'all are doing of one another, knock it off. I will go to the cross. I will be the sacrifice so that you know mercy. And dear people of God, this is our reality. We are invited to be drenched in God's mercy. We are invited to walk the way of mercy. Mercy is a journey. It's not an end. Jesus says, learn what this means. And I think what he means in that is practice this. I desire mercy for Matthew the tax collector, not his sacrifice. And so in order to make that happen, Jesus goes to the cross that we might know mercy, that we might follow in the way of mercy, that we might practice mercy. There's even one more dimension to this, I think. Sometimes I think that we do this thing where we say, if only I was a better person, if only I exercised more and lost that 15 pounds, if only I ate right, if only, then I would be right, then I would be God, or then I would be good with God, good with myself, not God. And here, even that, I think these words, here, even there, these words are for us. I desire mercy for you, not your sacrifice. I do not desire that you cut out pieces of yourself to be made whole, to be made well. The goodness, the mercy of God is yours because of Jesus. Full stop. So that wherever you are, if you're the immigrant or a person who loves an immigrant, if you are an ICE agent, if you're a white Christian nationalist, this mercy of God, scandalously, unsatisfyingly sometimes for me, this mercy of God, this healing of God is yours. And somehow we manage to say, thanks be to God. Amen.